Todd, you've had 24 plus hours now. If you had to pick one thing that was the difference for your team, not McDavid and the other team, but for your team, what was the difference?
Now, are you talking Game 7 or the series or the series as a whole? I thought that they stuck to their game a little bit, could stay in their game longer than we did. Obviously, we're a checking team. They're an offensive team. You know, the summation of it all was Game 7, where they did both parts. They checked well, and they were a good offensive team. We never got to both parts, if that makes any sense. We were on our heels, and we weren't on our toes, but that was in part because of how they played. But games 2 and 3, we didn't look anywhere near what we needed to look like. We got it back, and after that, we just wasn't enough for us.
In hindsight, is Game 6 though the one that got away? That's the one that...
Absolutely. There's a lot of psychology in Game 6. They were struggling with starts. They scored early in Game 6 on the wraparound. We came back, which wasn't something that we did in the series. When we got down, they took off on us. They increased the scoring, so we came back in Game 6, and you know, late in the game we make a critical play, and it gives them confidence, obviously, going home, and they built on that. So,
can you consider this season a success?
Well, I guess there's different ways of looking at it, and I said this after the game, that the short-term disappointment was a disappointment because we were in it to win it. I said that multiple times. When you look at where we started and where we ended and things we needed to overcome, arriving in a playoff position, the struggle down the stretch to get in, all those things were really good for our team. So from that perspective, it was successful. The answer can't come out now because it's what we do with it next season. And again, I went on a little rant after Game 7. I was already taking us into next season, but it happens that fast. And the mentality when we meet with these players is to prepare them for that. I've lived it in San Jose. I've lived it in Edmonton. It becomes a really tough year now. Expectations go up. Stress levels go up, as they should, for everybody. So the answer to was it successful this year or not will lie in what we do with it next season. And that may not make any sense, but it's real clear to me.
But achieving one of your goals, making the playoffs, would it not deem it success as opposed to last season? We talk about growth.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. From that perspective, we got into the playoffs. That's huge for our group. That's very successful. But we're trying to establish a team that can consistently. I look at St. Louis, consistently do it, and while they're consistently doing it, they're winning championships, and that's success. This short-term goal of making the playoffs, that's great. If you give it all back in a season or you don't approach the next year, it doesn't matter. And that was my comment on experience. There are 5-on-5 play, success. Special teams, no success, needs improvement. Individual evolution and improvement. I thought our mid-range players, mid-tier players were outstanding. I thought additions were outstanding. Mid-range, you think Lizzo, Trevor Moore, Matt Roy, Mikey Anderson when he was healthy. They really made strides. I thought our youth, some made strides, some didn't. And in large part, that's due to age and expectations and handling it and growing up. Arthur Kalev, as a youthful individual, I wouldn't have guessed at training camp he would be the one that maybe had the most growth, but he did. And that's just the way it happens. You can't predict how quick they're going to grow up and how fast things are going to happen. So success, there's some. And we have to look at it in so many different ways. But the primary goal of making the playoffs, you can check that box off. Doesn't mean anything, though, if we don't do anything next year with it.
So last season coming into training camp, you didn't want to talk playoffs. This season in training camp, you didn't want to talk playoffs. What's the message going to be in September then?
Get ready. We won't be talking about playoffs because if we have a 1-6-1 start, or was it 1-5-1? 1-5-1 start, that is unacceptable now. 1-5-1 start wasn't acceptable this year, but the pressures and the stresses on the group are going to be significantly different, and you have to be ready for that. I've been with teams where we're not ready for that, and it can spiral. And sorry.
There's going to be one less veteran in the room next year with 23 gone. How important is it to go out and add a veteran voice, beyond just the growth of the kids?
Blake Lizotte, Trevor Moore, Adrian Kempe, huge growth in leadership. Huge, huge. We lose that significant voice, and I don't mean to demean or lower the significance that Brownie had. It was immense, especially down the stretch, the voice that he had. But we have 3 or 4 that need to step up and bring it even more. And I started to see that this year with them. Dustin Brown, year 3 or 4, that's the individual we're obviously losing. He started to grow into that role. We have guys that are capable of doing it. So it's there.
Back to what you said earlier about your previous jobs, was that sort of what you were thinking about when you came in and you wanted to put that message out about next year being tougher based on like what happened sort of in those situations?
Well, for me, the whole messaging that didn't come from me or from our team in per se was all about experience. And for us, that was a slap in our face because we were there to win. Yeah, you gain experience, I get it, we don't have a lot of players in, but I think there was a whole world out there that was just happy for us to be there, and Arthur Kalev gets to play in his first game, and Jordan Spence, but that's not how we looked at it. That was a byproduct of what we were doing there. And every time I got asked a question, it was about experience. Oh, these kids are gaining experience. Yeah, they are. So are the veterans. They haven't played in the playoffs in a long, long time. And at least for me, I don't know what the players would tell you. House money, gaining experience. We were there to win. And so maybe that's why I went off after. But I do believe if you don't capture experience and use it the right way, it can be lethal the other way.
You've seen it go both ways in your career. What's the biggest difference between moving forward and building off of success and then maybe sliding back a little bit in other situations?
Well, I think everybody plays a role in it, coaching staff. If we expect to move forward and doing it with our power play and penalty kill performance this year, then we're making a grave mistake as a staff. Organizationally, continuing to build the team. Blakey did an outstanding job last year, and his staff of bringing in players that fit our group and trusting players. We could play them in any situation, and that rubs off on other players. So they have a part in it. But the mentality of the player, being prepared and understanding what lies ahead, and that's our job to share that with them before they leave. And make sure that they get it, and maybe remind them with a phone call throughout the summer. And then make sure they're on key at training camp. Even that doesn't guarantee you success out of the gate, but at least it gives you a chance. Avoid any of those steps and you're probably going to go the other way.
Can you talk about the evolution of the team? When you kind of came over, it was a lot about the core group of 2-time Cup champions, and they kind of slowly have gone away. There's 3 now, and now this season they brought in Deneau and Arvidsson, and now these guys are kings, and the young guys growing up. Just what your expectations are for this new story to be written.
Good point. I think when Quentin Byfield or anybody else that maybe drafted or youth that walks into the locker room, their eyes are still going to go to number 11, number 8, number 32. And they should. They've put themselves out there. They've won. I want to see where Kopi dresses. I want to see Kopi. I want to meet him for the first time. I want to, see if he shakes my hand. And that's all great. But if you're prepared and you've kind of watched things, you should be keeping an eye on 12 and on 24 and on 44, the way he carries himself, and 3, because they're starting to take over, not take away from Kopi or Drew, but they're starting to take more prominent positions with their play and with their preparation and leadership. That's a healthy thing for a team.
In your introductory press conference, you introduced the metaphor of a marathon.
Mm-hmm.
Without worrying about like what mile we're on, is the organization keeping a pace in that marathon that you think is?
Yeah, maybe we sped the pace up a little bit this year. I don't know. I would think that most of the outside world thought we took it to a sprint. I don't think we see it that way in the locker room or in the organization. We expected to have some gains, but we're still running, and we got a lot of tough miles ahead of us.
I'm going to ask you about a couple individual players, starting with Byfield. What do you think of his development throughout the year? And what are you looking for him maybe in the near term, like let's say
Yep.
next year?
I think that Quentin has a very tough task coming in and fulfilling expectations that are put on him, whether it's the organization or outside. To think that this young man could still be playing in the Ontario Hockey League is also a reminder that he's very young and he has a lot of things that he still needs to learn. He knows that, and we know that. But the raw tools and package that is there should allow him to be a very good player as time allows him. And I think Adrian Kempe is a very good example. We want to hurry these kids so much, and sometimes the ones that you're not even talking about hurrying evolve a little bit quicker because there's less pressure on them. Did anybody think Jordan Spence was going to be playing? Not a lot of pressure on that young man. Compare that to what Q is, think about who you asked about first. You said you wanted to ask about a few players and you went right to 55. That's a prime example of what he has to live with day after day after day as a junior age player still.
Coaches like to second guess themselves as they process after the fact. You mentioned Jordan Spence. As you think back to sort of Game 6, Game 7, any hesitation about the fact that he didn't get back in there and maybe give you something, especially on the power play, which you mentioned earlier as well?
No.
Drew talked about the system, saying this system was great, 99.2, produced a lot of shots, top 5 shots, last in shooting percentage. Can you solve the offense internally, or do you have to go to Rob and say, we need another finisher to add to this mix, to move to the next level?
It's interesting because you said how coaches, and I think I used the Santa Claus analogy. I'm an idiot with that analogies, but I used the Santa Claus one at the trade deadline. Like, we're coaches. We want more all the time, but we're also realists, and we have a lot of real good players. Artie Kalev shot 7.4%. He's perhaps one of our best shooters. Volume shooting, yes. Do I think that Artie's going to stay at 5.1% 5-on-5 next year? I think that's going to increase. He's going to feel better about it, especially early in the year. A lot of guys get their confidence early in the year. So there are players that are coming that are going to score more goals. Phil Deneau and Victor Arvidsson didn't get off to a real rocketing offensive start, but they came to a new team. Arvidsson left, I call it his diaper team. You grow up in diapers on a team. That's hard to do. You never want to leave your original team. He left it. He had to adjust. Phil came to a new environment and had to adjust, but they started to score for us. There's scoring in that locker room. We need to help them on the power play, and we take a large responsibility of that, but we will. There's scoring in the organization. You look across the hallway, they're scoring there. Are the guys that are scoring, are they NHL players? I don't know. I guess we'll find that out over time, but we have players that can score.
Going back to training camp 2 years ago, coming out of the pandemic, you were complimentary of Brunstrom, having played, in Europe during the time off and whatnot. Didn't get a lot of playing time though over the last 2 seasons. You put him in a much bigger role. Is he growing into, or is he growing into the player that you want or need him to be at this point?
He has, and he will continue to. We're actually meeting, and I'm glad that you disrupted it because it's been long, but we're meeting and reviewing individual players as a coaching staff right now. And then we'll meet with Rob and his staff tomorrow, share our thoughts, mix them all together, and we'll have a pretty good picture of what the entire organization thought about individuals. When it comes to Grunny, more than one individual thought that he was the most improved player, just in our short meetings today. He's going to go to the World Championships. He's leaving. He's the one player we've met with, and I shared that with him and got one of Grunny's smiles, trademark smiles, so good for him.
Todd, when you look at your team, great on the road this year, decent at home, how can they become a better team on home ice and still maintain road play? Is there anything different that you've seen over the course of the year that happens on the road that doesn't happen at home?
No, I really don't. Sometimes the games just roll out. Timing, opponents, quality of opponents, back-to-backs. I don't think there's anything significant about our game in one building or the other. The biggest change came in our road record, if you will. Not necessarily our home record. It wasn't that far off from other years. So we played better on the road. I think that the question would be, for me, is why did that happen? I think we had more trusting players. We had better opportunities at matching up on the road than we did the year before. Obviously, Phil and Victor and Edler, all these players allowed us to weather some storms maybe better than we did the year prior. So the significance for me is the other way. It's how did you improve on the road rather than what can you do better at home.
Brownie was much more physical in the playoffs than he probably has been in maybe 3 seasons. Was there maybe a conversation that took place before and you expected a certain type of play from him in the playoffs, or was it something that happened organically?
I think that we got to play in game 83, and that's Dustin's time. And he knew what was on the line, and there's nothing left in that tank after he played those 7 games, and there's no better way of going out than that. And it was, I don't know, you'd have to ask Dustin this, but I'm sure he sat back and said, I'm probably not going to be the fastest guy in this series. I may not be the leading scorer, but there's something I can still really bring. And it's physicality and leadership, and he was not short on any of those.
You mentioned you have more scoring in that room. Guys like Anderson and Dursey and Spence, they're not going to grow 3 inches over the time. Do you need more size in the blue line?
We'd like to have the biggest, most offensive, shutdown group of defensemen in the NHL. But again, that's the fantasy world that we're in. It doesn't work that way. And there's 3 guys that are up for the Norris Trophy. I don't think we're going to be acquiring any of them. They tend to have some size. So you still have to eat dinner with the ingredients you have. So we're going to eat dinner, and we're going to make the players we have better. I'm not walking into Blakey's room, pounding the door and said, we need to change all this. He's very good at what he does, and he'll give us everything we need.
But doesn't the cook want something put on the ingredients?
Oh, I get to talk to him all the time. But we see it very much the same.
What's been one of the ingredients you have? I mean, last year walks and runs you go down, that was a big strain. This year, it was all sick from opening night, and you guys were able to weather that storm, prosper through it. Can you kind of assess the change in the decor from year to year and where it stands now moving forward?
Boy, oh boy. That's a tough question to answer because we were so 13 different defensemen this year. So what do we really have back there today? We have a lot of guys that can play. Can we find the right combination and do we have the right ingredients? But we have guys that can play. They prove that. We don't want to go through the injury parade again, but we don't get to dictate that. I know we missed Drew Doughty immensely. And sometimes as coaches, we can whine and bitch about his game until he's out of the lineup, and then we're begging to get him back in. And, one of the, if not the best player in the world, really did a lot of damage against us in the playoffs. I think that having 8 back there would have helped us a little bit with that situation. So I think getting him back helps a lot of areas. It takes our penalty kill up. It allows our power play numbers to get better. But we can't just rely on number 8 coming back or even walks. When we started the season, the first 15 days we were together in training camp, Drew was running the number 1 power play and Walks was running the number 2. We're 5 games in and they're both gone. Changes things quickly. They both were penalty killers. Changes things quickly. Give the kids credit that came up from the minors because they pinch hit. That's what they in basketball. The bench players or whatever, they made a significant impact on our ability to move forward, and they've opened up our eyes. It's probably the most competitive position at training camp next year.
When you're doing your end of year evaluations with the players, how much weight is given to performance in the playoffs?
It's rolled into the package. There were a number of players that elevated. There were some that fell off, and we have to ask the elevated ones ask ourselves if the elevated ones can get there again and maintain it, and we have to dig deep into why some fell off. And then decisions are made and we go forward. But their whole body of work also comes into play. We had guys playing hurt. We had shoulder problem, broken fingers. It comes into play, and you've got to take that into consideration.
We've seen these 2 scenarios from both sides of the benches. 2011 is the what if year here. Kings played the Sharks. Kopitar's injured. What if? Now it's, Doughty's injured this year. What if? Do you see the comparisons between those 2 seasons, albeit from different benches?
Yeah, I can't comment on obviously we were involved in the 2011, but it's too distant. I don't know the feel of the Kings team at that time, the evolution. I can remember a lot of their players, but this one it's a chance, an opportunity for us to use it as a stepping stone if we're smart enough to do it as players, coaches.
Todd, you mentioned Arthur earlier. The progress he made on the ice in terms of his 200-foot game growing, did you also see a maturity off the ice? And we talk about players needing to grow up,
Yep.
and he did.
So if I'm following right, I want to make sure I answer your question right. Like you saw him grow up on the ice.
Yeah, and obviously we don't spend much time around him off the ice.
Yeah. So are you asking me about off the ice, Lisa, or
Yeah.
on, or the whole thing, or
Maybe it's the whole package.
the whole
yeah.
package? Quite honestly, I'm not sure that I saw Artie playing on our team this year. His training camp was a little indifferent. He had a pretty good night in Anaheim, earned him another opportunity, and all of a sudden he's an opening night lineup. But from there, he earned our trust in a lot of different areas. And we tried to graduate him up a few times, and he gave us signals that maybe he wasn't quite ready, so he went back down and he just kept working on his game. And I think he's going to be a very big factor in our advancement. But again, we're talking about a young man that's just leaving junior hockey. If you saw him at the end of the year, in compared to the beginning of the year, the body and the muscle and all that type of stuff. A lot of guys lose that at that young age, and he'll have to work on his fitness and conditioning and engine part of his game, because he has enough skill and talent to play 20 minutes a night, but that's got to get up to where he can handle it. And we saw it in the playoffs when we put him up there. He was very capable of playing, so maybe he's improving in those areas. But it's the whole boys to men is a bad cliche, but you go from playing with boys to living every day with men, and you got to make that adjustment quickly, and sometimes it's not fair to a lot of those kids to ask them to do it, and we want to force it so fast. Connor, Austin Matthews, Jack Eichel, those three in particular made it hard for every young draft pick now.
You talk about the need, though, for this team to take the next step. How important is it for Kaliev to elevate himself off that fourth line and to take on a bigger role for this team to take the next step? Because
that's part of the team taking the next step, is the individuals have to take the next step. So it's important. And we'll share that with him. We'll share that with a number of players. Trevor Moore took the next step last year. What's his next step for the following year? Is there more? Is he at the ceiling, or is there more for more? So not just the young player. There's way more runway for the young player than there is for some others. So how do you push some of those mid-range players to push the bar a little bit higher?
What about regression also? How do you prevent
Well,
regression from Kempe?
We don't prevent it. He prevents it. He's going to have to understand the pressures that come with his situation, and that's leading scorer, 35 goal scorer, the business part of the game, and you have to live that sometimes to really appreciate the pressure, and he'll have to learn to deal with it.
I wanted to ask you about Dubs. Seemed like he had some struggles at the end of Game 6, but recommitted himself in Game 7. That's kind of a microcosm of the year. He was in and he was out. He was making an impact. He was disappearing. Obviously, the last 3 years have been kind of a tough stretch in his career. What do you think it's going to take for him, not only to stick as a regular again, but to really take advantage of the talent he has?
That's a really, I hope that when you guys get a chance to meet with him, you ask him that question. I can't answer that question. I can give him opportunity, I can help him, I can put him in situations where I think he can succeed, and it's up to him. I think that he was one of the top 2 or 3, maybe 4 talented players in our series, based on pure skill, talent, hockey sense. So can he put it all together? I believe we talked in Edmonton about how important this series was for him and our group, but for him as an individual too. So we'll see where it all goes, and he's an incredible hockey player. He's got to get it all together, and his health situation this season did not help him one bit, not one bit. He just got going, traction, and then fell off, and it happened more than once, obviously.
Last question from Dennis.
You've been in favor of transparency all since you've been here, except in the playoff game. And then you said, I'm not going to tell you the lines, I'm not going to tell you injuries, because that's what happens in the playoffs. Does the code need to change?
Well, here's what I'll ask you. Let me throw a question back at you. At 11 o'clock in the morning, do you need to know if Carl Grunstrom or Artie Kalev's playing?
If I ask the question, yeah.
How come you're asking me the question? What information do you need between 2 fourth-line left wingers?
To write a story, to report on who
Inform
you're
the
going to
public.
play.
I'm going back after it. I'm going on your website. I'm going to see how many stories you wrote between 11 a.m. and the game. I had somebody, because we talked about this off camera, you were there, and somebody says, well, we got to get prepared. I got to call the game. And I'm going, you called 82 of our games. It wasn't you, Todd. If you can't replace Jordan Spence with Mikey Anderson probably shouldn't be calling the game. So the code is the amount of preparation and work and effort and edge you're looking for in a playoff series is immense. Heck, even during the year, some guys don't announce their starting goalies because you have no idea how much time and effort is put into the pre-scout on that goaltender. Shootouts, what happens off face-offs, where are guys scoring from, what type of shot, from what type of angle, does he tire? All these things go into play. So why would we do the other team's homework for them? And the other coach is doing the exact same thing. So when you get to playoffs, we had 26 players with us, is that right? 26 or 7 players. They were all available for the most part, other than Drew and Walks. Why wouldn't we make the other team work? And the broadcasting team. Just for the fourth line change, because let's face it, we weren't taking Kopi out. So I answered your question in a roundabout way, but that is how we think, and that's the code, and whether it's the right code or not, I don't know.